The stars had never seemed so threatening before. Lieutenant Jake Morrison stood at the observation window of the USS Valiant, watching as hundreds of alien ships appeared in the darkness of space. They emerged from nowhere, their hulls gleaming with strange metals that reflected Earth's distant sun. The ships were massive, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Jake had joined the space program 5 years ago, back when the biggest concern was mining asteroids and establishing a base on Mars. Nobody had expected visitors from another world. Nobody had prepared for war. Captain Helen Carter's voice came through the intercom, calm but firm. All personnel were to report to their stations immediately. This was not a drill. Jake turned away from the window and ran toward the bridge, his heart pounding in his chest. The bridge was chaos. Officers shouted coordinates and status reports. Screens displayed the enemy fleet in formation, arranged in perfect geometric patterns that seemed almost beautiful. There were 300 alien vessels, and they were moving toward Earth with purpose. Helen stood at the center of it all, her hands gripped tight on the command console. She had been a Navy captain before joining the space program, and her military training showed in every movement. When she spoke, everyone listened. "Get me a count of our forces," she ordered. The communications officer, a young man named Peter, typed rapidly at his station. His face went pale as he read the results. "We have 42 ships in total, Captain. 20 from the United States, 8 from China, 6 from Europe, and 8 combined from other nations. 42 against 300. The odds were impossible. Helen's jaw tightened, but she showed no fear. "Contact all vessels. Tell them to form defensive positions around Earth. We hold the line here no matter what." Jake took his position at the tactical station. His job was to coordinate weapons fire and defensive maneuvers. He had trained for this role, but all the simulations in the world hadn't prepared him for the real thing. His hands shook as he activated the targeting systems. The alien fleet stopped just beyond the orbit of the moon. For several long minutes, nothing happened. The silence felt worse than any attack. Then a message came through on all frequencies, translated by some technology humanity didn't understand. The message was simple and cold. Humanity was to surrender immediately. Resistance would result in total destruction. Earth would become part of the Zethran Empire, and its people would serve their new masters. There would be no negotiation. Helen read the message twice, then deleted it. "Send our response," she said. "Tell them no." Peter looked at her in shock. "Captain, they're asking for our surrender. Maybe we should consider—" I said no. Helen's voice cut through the bridge like a knife. "We didn't come this far as a species to bow down the first time someone threatens us. Send the message." The response went out across space. One simple word. No. The alien fleet began to move. They came in waves, their ships gliding through space with grace that human vessels couldn't match. Their weapons fired beams of pure energy that cut through the darkness like lightning. The first human ship to die was the Beijing, a Chinese destroyer that had been positioned at the front line. It exploded in a ball of fire that faded quickly in the vacuum of space. Helen gave the order to return fire. 41 human ships unleashed everything they had: missiles, railguns, laser batteries, and experimental weapons that scientists had barely tested. The firepower lit up space like a fireworks display. Most of the shots missed. The alien ships moved too fast, dodged too well. But some found their targets. Jake watched as one of the enemy vessels took a direct hit from a missile barrage. Its shields glowed bright blue, absorbing the impact. The ship continued forward, undamaged. "Their shields are too strong," Jake reported. "Our weapons aren't getting through." Helen nodded, her mind already working on the problem. "Then we get creative. All ships focus fire on single targets. Concentrate everything on one ship at a time. Overwhelm their shields through sheer volume." The human fleet adjusted its tactics. 3 ships targeted one alien vessel, pouring all their firepower into it at once. The shields flickered, weakened, and then failed. Human weapons tore into the alien hull, and the ship broke apart in silence. It was the first alien casualty of the war. It would not be the last, but the cost was high. For every alien ship destroyed, humanity lost 5. The battle raged for hours, and Jake lost count of how many friendly vessels went dark on his screen. Each one represented hundreds of lives, people he might have known, might have trained with. Commander Lisa Bennett led a squadron of 12 fighter craft, small and fast compared to the massive destroyers. She had been a test pilot before the war, known for taking risks that other pilots wouldn't dare. Now those risks were keeping her alive. Lisa noticed something during the battle. The alien ships moved in predictable patterns. They followed formations that never changed, responded to attacks in the same way every time. They were efficient, organized, and completely inflexible. She switched to the squadron channel. All fighters follow my lead. We're going to try something stupid. Her wingmen didn't hesitate. They had flown with Lisa long enough to trust her instincts. The 12 fighters broke formation and accelerated directly toward the alien fleet, weaving between the massive ships like insects around giants. The aliens fired at them, but the fighters were too small and too fast. Lisa led them straight through the enemy formation, firing at critical points, targeting weapon systems and engine ports. It was suicide tactics, and it worked. 3 more alien ships fell, crippled by the fighter attack. By the time the first battle ended, 12 hours had passed. 30 human ships were destroyed. 5 alien vessels drifted in space, dead or dying. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a total defeat either. Jake slumped in his chair, exhausted beyond anything he had ever felt. His uniform was soaked with sweat and his hands ached from gripping the controls. Around him, the bridge crew looked the same. Tired, scared, but still alive. Helen stood at her station, straight-backed and alert. "Damage report," she ordered. The reports came in slowly. The Valiant had taken damage but was still operational. Many ships weren't so lucky. The human fleet was down to 33 vessels, many of them barely functional. But they had survived. Against impossible odds, they had survived the first encounter. More importantly, they had drawn blood. The aliens weren't invincible. Helen looked out at the enemy fleet still hovering in the distance. They hadn't retreated, but they hadn't advanced either. Perhaps they were surprised. Perhaps they were reassessing. "All ships fall back to defensive positions," Helen ordered. "Get repairs underway. We have maybe 6 hours before they come again." Jake pulled up the tactical display, studying the enemy formation. His training told him this was hopeless. The numbers didn't lie. Humanity couldn't win this fight, but something in his gut, something deeper than logic or reason, refused to accept that conclusion. Humans had faced extinction before, had stared into the abyss and clawed their way back. This was just another fight, another challenge, and humans were very, very good at fighting. On the alien flagship, Admiral Krevthar reviewed the battle reports with growing confusion. 5 ships lost, 5 ships in a first contact scenario against a primitive species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. It was unthinkable. His tactical officers assured him it was an anomaly. The humans had been lucky. The next engagement would proceed as planned and Earth would fall. But Krevthar wasn't so certain. He had seen something in that battle, something he had never encountered in all his years of conquest. These humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't retreat when overwhelmed. They didn't surrender when the odds turned against them. They fought harder. They became more dangerous. It was irrational. It was disturbing. And it made the Admiral wonder, for the first time in his long military career, if perhaps his empire had made a terrible mistake. 3 months had passed since the first battle, and the war showed no signs of ending. Every week brought new conflicts in space, on Earth's moon, and in the asteroid belt. The Zethrans kept coming and humanity kept fighting back. Captain Ryan Foster sat in the damaged cockpit of his frigate, the Defiant. The ship had taken a beating in the last engagement near Mars. Hull breaches on 3 decks, engines running at 60% capacity, and life support failing in the aft sections. By all rights, the ship should have been scrapped. But humanity didn't have the luxury of scrapping anything that could still fight. Ryan guided the limping vessel toward the Lunar Defense Station, a massive structure that orbited Earth's moon. It had been built as a commercial shipping hub, but the war had transformed it into a military repair facility. Ships came and went constantly, getting patched up just enough to return to battle. Nicole Page was waiting for him at the docking bay. She was an engineer, barely 30 years old, with grease-stained coveralls and tired eyes that never seemed to rest. Before the war, she had worked on civilian spacecraft, fixing navigation systems and maintaining life support. Now she was reverse engineering alien technology and performing miracles on a daily basis. "Your ship looks like garbage," Nicole said as Ryan climbed out of the airlock. "Nice to see you too," Ryan replied with a weak smile. "Can you fix her?" Nicole walked around the frigate, examining the damage with a critical eye. Scorch marks covered the hull where energy weapons had nearly burned through. One of the engine pods hung at an odd angle, barely attached. "I can fix anything," she said. "Question is how long it'll take. I've got 17 other ships waiting for repairs. How long can you give me?" 3 days, maybe 4. But I've got something new to show you. Come on." Ryan followed her through the station's corridors. The place was crowded with crew members, technicians, and wounded soldiers. Every available space had been converted into something useful. Storage rooms became barracks. Cafeterias became strategy centers. The station hummed with constant activity, people working around the clock to keep the war effort alive. Nicole led him to a sealed hangar bay. Inside, several ships were undergoing modifications. But these weren't just repairs. The vessels looked different. Alien technology grafted onto human designs in ways that seemed impossible. "What am I looking at?" Ryan asked. "Upgrades," Nicole said proudly. "We've been studying the Zethran ships we've captured or destroyed. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, but it's not magic. It follows rules, and rules can be understood. I've been pulling their weapon systems apart and figuring out how to make them work with our ships." She pointed to a destroyer that had alien energy cannons mounted on its hull. "Those are Zethran plasma batteries. They hit 3 times harder than our best weapons. I had to rebuild the entire power distribution system to make them work, but they work." Ryan stared in amazement. "How is this possible?" "We've only been fighting them for 3 months." Nicole shrugged. "Desperation is a hell of a motivator. When the choice is innovate or die, you'd be surprised what you can accomplish. Besides, the Zethrans make everything too complicated. They've got redundant systems and safety protocols that slow everything down. I stripped all that out. These hybrid systems are crude, but they're effective." Over the next 3 days, Nicole's team worked on the Defiant. They installed salvaged Zethran shields, upgraded the engines with alien propulsion technology, and mounted weapons that humanity had no business possessing. Ryan watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and concern. The ship looked like a monster, a patchwork of human and alien technology held together by welds and hope. "Will it fly?" Ryan asked on the 3rd day. "Only one way to find out," Nicole replied. "Take her out for a test run. Just don't blow up. I hate wasting good work." The Defiant launched from the station and performed better than Ryan had dared hope. The ship was faster, hit harder, and could take more damage. It wasn't pretty, but it was deadly. Across the fleet, other ships were receiving similar upgrades. Humanity was learning, adapting, and turning the enemy's own technology against them. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Zethrans attempted a ground invasion. They chose Montana, a remote area with low population density. The aliens thought it would be an easy landing, a chance to establish a foothold and demonstrate their dominance. They were very wrong. Sergeant Danny Hughes commanded a platoon of Marines stationed at a small base near the landing site. When the alien dropships descended through the atmosphere, Danny and his soldiers were waiting. They didn't have fancy weapons or advanced technology. What they had was experience, creativity, and a deep understanding of their terrain. The Zethran soldiers emerged from their ships in formation, armored and armed with energy weapons that could cut through steel. They moved with military precision, scanning for threats and advancing according to their tactical doctrine. Everything by the book, everything predictable. Danny's platoon hit them from 3 sides at once. Rockets launched from hidden positions took out 2 dropships before they could unload. Snipers fired from ridgelines a mile away, targeting officers and communication equipment. Mines that had been buried along the expected advance routes exploded, throwing alien soldiers into chaos. The Zethrans had superior armor, but they didn't understand guerrilla warfare. They fought in open spaces, maintaining formation and following standard procedures. Danny's Marines fought dirty. They used the forest for cover, attacked and retreated, set traps and ambushes. Lieutenant Karen Miller led a squad that captured a Zethran weapons cache. Instead of destroying it, they figured out how to use the alien guns. Within hours, human soldiers were firing Zethran weapons at Zethran troops. The aliens had never encountered an enemy that stole their technology and used it against them in the same battle. The ground war lasted 2 weeks. The Zethrans had expected to secure the area in 2 days. They brought in reinforcements, heavier weapons, and air support. But every advantage they gained, the humans countered. When the aliens used aerial drones, the Marines shot them down with captured alien anti-air weapons. When the Zethrans called in orbital strikes, the humans evacuated and attacked from new positions. Sergeant Danny Hughes became something of a legend during those 2 weeks. He led raids that destroyed alien supply lines. He planned ambushes that killed 3 times more enemies than his forces should have been able to handle. He turned every disadvantage into an opportunity. On the 13th day, Danny's platoon trapped an entire Zethran company in a canyon. They had lured the aliens in with false retreats and radio signals that suggested a human command post. When the Zethrans were committed to the attack, the Marines triggered explosives that sealed both ends of the canyon. Then they simply waited. The aliens had supplies for 3 days. They could have held out, called for rescue, but humanity didn't give them 3 days. Danny coordinated with other units to maintain constant pressure, firing into the canyon, denying the enemy rest or reinforcement. The Zethran commander surrendered on the 15th day. It was the first time in their empire's history that a Zethran military unit had surrendered to what they considered a primitive species. The shock rippled through the alien chain of command. Admiral Krevthar received the report in his flagship orbiting Earth. He read it 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. A full company, 200 trained soldiers defeated by a human force 1/4 their size. The human commander, this Sergeant Hughes, had used tactics that violated every principle of modern warfare. And they had worked. The admiral began studying human military history. What he discovered disturbed him more than any battlefield loss. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire existence. They had developed thousands of different strategies, tactics, and approaches to combat. They didn't have one military doctrine. They had hundreds, and they switched between them as needed. The Zethran Empire fought the same way they had fought for 5,000 years. Efficient, organized, predictable, they had perfected warfare to a science. But the humans treated war as an art, constantly changing and evolving. In space, the war continued. Captain Helen Carter led the defense of the asteroid belt, using the rocky field as cover for hit-and-run attacks. Commander Jake Morrison coordinated fleet movements that confused Zethran tactical computers. Ships appeared where they shouldn't be, attacked from impossible angles, and retreated before the enemy could respond effectively. Captain Ryan Foster took the upgraded Defiant into battle near Jupiter. His hybrid ship tore through Zethran formations, its alien weapons carving up enemy vessels while its improved shields absorbed return fire. Other upgraded ships joined him, and together they destroyed an entire Zethran squadron. The war was changing. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were learning, adapting, and improving. Every battle taught them something new about their enemy. Every defeat made them stronger. Nicole Page worked 18-hour days, training other engineers to retrofit ships with alien technology. Her innovation spread through the human fleet like wildfire. Within 2 months, nearly every human vessel had some kind of upgrade. They weren't just copying Zethran technology. They were improving it, making it faster, lighter, and more effective. Admiral Krevthar watched this evolution with growing concern. Dr. Amy Sullivan had never expected to become a military scientist. Before the war, she had studied biology and xenology, dreaming of the day humanity would make peaceful contact with alien life. Now she spent her days in a secret research facility buried deep beneath the mountains of Nevada, studying the enemy and looking for weaknesses. The facility was cold, sterile, and always busy. Scientists worked in teams, analyzing captured Zethran technology, studying alien biology, and interrogating prisoners. Amy led the Xenopsychology Division, a fancy name for figuring out how the aliens thought. She had interviewed 37 Zethran prisoners over the past 2 months. Each interview followed a similar pattern. The aliens were polite, cooperative, and completely inflexible in their thinking. They answered questions with precise detail, never lying or withholding information. At first, Amy thought this was a trick. But as the interviews continued, she realized it was simply how they operated. The Zethrans didn't understand deception the way humans did. They had a rigid hierarchy where orders flowed down from superiors and were obeyed without question. Every soldier knew their exact place in the command structure. Every decision was made based on calculated logic and proven strategy. It was efficient, organized, and utterly predictable. Amy compiled her findings into a report and sent it to Admiral Patrick Lewis, the commander of Earth's Defense Forces. Lewis was a career military officer who had served in 3 different navies before taking command of the unified space fleet. He was smart, experienced and desperate for any advantage against the Zethran forces. He read Amy's report in one sitting, then read it again. When he finished, he called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. "The enemy is predictable," Lewis said, standing at the head of the conference table. Around him sat his top commanders, including Captain Helen Carter and Commander Jake Morrison. According to Dr. Sullivan's research, the Zethrans operate on a strict command hierarchy. Every decision comes from the top down. Soldiers don't think for themselves. They follow orders and execute standard procedures. That's a strength, Helen pointed out. It makes them efficient and coordinated. It's also a weakness, Lewis replied, because we don't operate that way. Human military forces encourage independent thinking. We promote officers who can adapt and improvise. We give our commanders the freedom to make their own tactical decisions. The Zethrans can't predict us because we're fundamentally different from any enemy they've faced before. Jake leaned forward in his chair. So how do we exploit that? Lewis smiled. We embrace the chaos. I'm proposing Operation Wildfire. We divide our fleet into small independent task forces. Each group will have complete autonomy to engage the enemy as they see fit. No central command beyond the broadest strategic goals. Every captain becomes their own admiral. Every pilot makes their own tactical decisions. The room went silent. It was a radical idea, the opposite of traditional military doctrine. Armies succeeded through coordination and unity of command. What Lewis was proposing seemed like organized chaos. It could work, Helen said slowly. The Zethrans expect us to operate like they do. If we give them chaos instead of order, they won't know how to respond. It's risky, another commander argued. We could lose coordination. Ships might work against each other instead of together. We're already losing, Lewis said flatly. We've been fighting for 4 months and we're barely holding on. The Zethrans keep coming and eventually our numbers will run out. We need to change the game completely. We need to become unpredictable. The vote was close, but Operation Wildfire was approved. Over the next week, the human fleet reorganized itself into dozens of small units. Each group consisted of 3 to 5 ships, commanded by officers who were told to trust their instincts and ignore traditional tactics. Captain Greg Palmer commanded one such unit, 3 frigates operating near the orbit of Neptune. His orders were simple: engage Zethran forces whenever possible and disrupt their operations. How he accomplished that was entirely up to him. Greg had been a merchant marine captain before the war, running cargo between Earth and the outer colonies. He knew space the way some people knew city streets, every asteroid field and gravitational well. Now he used that knowledge to hunt the enemy. His unit found a Zethran supply convoy heading toward the inner system. 8 transport ships escorted by 4 warships. The logical move would be to call for reinforcements and attack in force. Instead, Greg did something crazy. He ordered his ships to scatter in different directions, making the Zethrans think the humans were retreating. Then when the alien escort separated to pursue, Greg's frigates turned around and hit the transports from 3 angles at once. They destroyed 5 supply ships in under 10 minutes, then disappeared into the outer system before the escorts could respond. Captain Beth Young commanded another task force near Mars. She coordinated with Greg without ever speaking to him directly, using encrypted burst transmissions that the Zethrans couldn't intercept fast enough. When Greg's unit drew enemy forces toward Neptune, Beth hit a Zethran mining operation in the asteroid belt. The aliens didn't know which attack to respond to first. The Zethran command structure couldn't adapt fast enough. They were used to fighting enemies that behaved predictably. When human forces appeared in one location, the Zethrans sent ships to counter them. But by the time those ships arrived, the humans were gone and attacking somewhere else entirely. It was guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale, and it was working. On Mars, Colonel Kevin Price defended the terraforming colonies with a force that had dwindled to just 300 soldiers. He faced a Zethran army of 3,000, supported by armor and air power. The odds were impossible, but Kevin had one advantage. He knew the terrain. The Martian colonies were built into the planet's surface, connected by underground tunnels that stretched for hundreds of miles. Kevin used these tunnels to move his forces, appearing in one location to strike at the enemy, then disappearing underground before the Zethrans could retaliate. He studied ancient Earth history, reading about guerrilla campaigns in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and South America. He learned from commanders who had faced superior forces, and won through patience and creativity. Then he applied those lessons to Mars. The Zethrans controlled the surface, but Kevin controlled everything below. He cut off their supply lines, sabotaged their equipment, and ambushed their patrols. When the aliens tried to storm the colony entrances, they found themselves fighting in narrow tunnels where their numbers meant nothing. Private Angela Ross was part of Kevin's force. She had joined the Mars colony as a farmer, growing crops in the underground greenhouses. Now she carried a rifle and fought in tunnels that smelled of dust and recycled air. She had never fired a weapon before the war. Now she was a veteran of dozens of engagements. "The aliens are too rigid," she told a journalist who had been trapped on Mars when the invasion began. "They do everything by procedure. They clear rooms the same way every time. They advance down corridors in the same formation. Once you figure out the pattern, you can beat them." The journalist, a man named Carl Dixon, recorded everything he saw. His reports were transmitted back to Earth and shared across the human networks. People needed heroes, needed to believe they could win. Kevin Price and his defenders became symbols of human resistance. The battle for Mars lasted 3 months. The Zethrans poured more forces into the conflict, determined to crush this pocket of resistance. But Kevin never fought the battle the aliens wanted. He hit and ran, defended and retreated, turned every Zethran advantage into a trap. On the 93rd day of the siege, the Zethran ground commander requested additional troops. His superior denied the request. The Empire was fighting on too many fronts, losing too many ships to human raids in the outer system. Mars would have to wait. Kevin Price had held off an army 10 times his size for 3 months. It wasn't a victory, but it was proof that humanity could survive against impossible odds. Back on Earth, Admiral Lewis watched as Operation Wildfire transformed the war. Human forces were still outnumbered, still outgunned, but they were no longer losing ground. The Zethrans couldn't maintain their offensive when human ships appeared everywhere at once, striking supply lines and support vessels. "We're like mosquitoes," Jake Morrison said during a strategy meeting. "Too small to kill the beast, but annoying enough to drive it crazy." Helen Carter laughed at that. "Then let's be the most annoying mosquitoes in the galaxy." The war entered a new phase. The Zethrans adapted, creating rapid response forces that could redeploy quickly. They started using more aggressive tactics, abandoning some of their rigid procedures. But every change they made, humanity countered. When the Zethrans became more aggressive, human forces became more elusive. When the aliens spread out to cover more territory, humanity concentrated its attacks on isolated units. The chess game continued, each side learning from the other. But there was a fundamental difference between the two civilizations. The Zethrans were learning to fight like humans. Humanity, however, had always fought this way. Adapt or die. Improvise or perish. It was written into human DNA, shaped by millions of years of evolution on a planet that constantly tried to kill them. The Imperial Dreadnought burned in space, venting atmosphere and debris. Secondary explosions rippled through its massive hull. The ship that had symbolized Zethran dominance for 5 millennia was crippled, drifting, dying. The remaining human ships pulled back, their ammunition exhausted, and their hulls scarred by battle. They had lost 41 vessels in the attack. 56 remained, barely operational, running on emergency power and prayers, but they had done the impossible. On the bridge of the Valiant, Captain Helen Carter slumped in her command chair, too exhausted to celebrate. Around her, the crew worked in stunned silence. They had survived. Against every calculation, every prediction, they had survived. Admiral Patrick Lewis transmitted a message on all frequencies, directed at the scattered Zethran fleet. "This is Admiral Lewis of the United Earth Defense Force. Your flagship is disabled. Your Emperor is at our mercy. Order your forces to stand down, and we will discuss terms for ending this war." The response came not from Admiral Krevthar, but from the Emperor himself. His face appeared on their screens, aged but composed despite the chaos around him. Emergency lighting flickered behind him, and the sounds of damage control efforts echoed in the background. "I will come aboard your vessel to discuss surrender," the Emperor said, "but I will do so personally, not through intermediaries. You have earned that much." 6 hours later, a small Zethran shuttle docked with the Valiant. Security protocols were established. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Nobody trusted the aliens, even in defeat. The Emperor could be coming to negotiate, or this could be one final attack. The airlock opened and the Emperor of the Zethran Empire stepped aboard a human vessel. He was tall, over 7 feet, with skin that had a faint blue tint. His eyes were large and dark, showing intelligence that had lived for centuries. He wore simple robes, not the armor of a warrior. 2 guards accompanied him, unarmed as promised. Captain Helen Carter met him in the conference room. Commander Jake Morrison stood beside her, along with Admiral Lewis and Dr. Amy Sullivan. The room was small, designed for human-sized occupants. The Emperor had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the ceiling. They sat across from each other, victor and vanquished, though neither looked particularly triumphant. Helen studied the alien leader, looking for signs of deception or hidden threats. She saw only exhaustion and something else: curiosity. "I expected you to demand our surrender," the Emperor said, speaking through a translation device. His voice was deep and carried authority even in defeat. "Yet your message spoke of discussion and terms. Why?" "Because we're not conquerors," Helen replied. "We didn't start this war. We didn't want it. We just refused to be conquered." The Emperor nodded slowly. "I reviewed the battle reports from the entire campaign. 5 months of warfare. My forces held every strategic advantage. Superior numbers, better technology, more experience. By every calculation, you should have been defeated in the first week." "But we weren't," Jake said. "No, you were not." The Emperor leaned forward, his large eyes focused on the humans. "I need to understand why. I have conquered 17 civilizations. All of them fought. All of them lost. All of them eventually accepted their place in the Empire. You are different. Even now, after crippling my flagship, you do not press your advantage. You offer discussion instead of destruction." "Why?" Dr. Amy Sullivan spoke up. She had spent months studying Zethran psychology, and now she faced the pinnacle of their civilization. "May I ask you a question first?" The Emperor gestured for her to proceed. "Why did you come here? What did you want from Earth?" "Order," the Emperor replied immediately. "The galaxy is chaotic. Species fight endlessly, waste resources, destroy themselves. The Empire brings structure, purpose, peace through unity. We conquer to save, to elevate primitive species into something greater." "But we don't want to be saved," Amy said gently. "We don't want your order. Humans thrive in chaos. We grow stronger through struggle. You look at our history and see endless war and conflict. We look at it and see endless growth and adaptation." Helen pulled up a display showing Earth's history. Wars, natural disasters, near-extinction events. Then she showed the recovery after each crisis. Agriculture, industrial revolution, space exploration. Every catastrophe followed by innovation. "This is who we are," Helen explained. "We've spent our entire existence fighting nature, fighting each other, fighting our own limitations. We don't know how to be any other way. When you came to conquer us, you gave us just another fight, and we're very good at fighting." The Emperor studied the historical data with growing fascination. "Your species has been to the brink of extinction multiple times. Ice ages, plagues, wars that killed millions. Any rational species would have learned caution, would have sought stability. We're not always rational," Jake said with a slight smile. "That's probably our greatest strength." "Strength?" The Emperor looked confused. "Irrationality is a weakness. It leads to poor decisions, wasted resources, unnecessary casualties. It also leads to creativity," Amy said. "Your forces follow strict protocols and proven strategies. That makes you efficient but predictable. Our forces make it up as they go, adapt in real time, try things that shouldn't work. Sometimes we fail spectacularly, but sometimes we succeed against impossible odds." The Emperor was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Finally he spoke. "I watched your engineer retrofit ships with our technology. She accomplished in weeks what should have taken our scientists years. She broke every safety protocol, ignored every design principle, and created hybrid vessels that performed better than either of our designs alone. It was reckless, dangerous, and brilliant." "That's Nicole Page," Helen said with pride. "She's typical of our species. Give us a problem and we'll solve it, even if the solution breaks all the rules. I watched your Sergeant Hughes defeat a force 10 times his size using tactics that no military academy would teach." The Emperor continued. "I watched your pilots fly maneuvers that should have killed them. I watched your ships attack when they should have retreated, scatter when they should have maintained formation, and somehow turn chaos into victory." "So you understand now," Jake said. "We can't be conquered because we refuse to accept conquest. We can't be predicted because we don't follow predictable patterns. We can't be broken because breaking just makes us adapt. The Emperor stood, his full height making him tower over the humans. But there was no threat in his posture, only consideration. I came to this system expecting to add another world to the Empire. Instead, I have learned that some species cannot be incorporated. They can only be partnered with or left alone. We're offering partnership, Admiral Lewis said. The war ends today. Both sides withdraw and establish peaceful relations. We share technology, culture, and knowledge as equals. No conquest, no subjugation, and if I refuse, the Emperor asked, then the war continues, Helen said flatly. You'll bring more ships, we'll keep fighting. Eventually, you might win through sheer numbers. But the cost will be enormous. Every victory will be paid for in blood and ships. And even if you conquer Earth, you'll never truly control humanity. We'll fight forever if we have to. The Emperor returned to his seat, looking at each human in turn. You would truly fight forever? Never surrender, never accept defeat? Our history proves it, Amy said. Humans have never given up. Even when enslaved, we rebelled. Even when occupied, we resisted. Even when seemingly defeated, we regrouped and returned. It's not logical, not efficient, but it's who we are. The negotiations lasted 3 days. The Zethran fleet remained in the outer system, while delegations worked out the details. The peace treaty was complex, covering everything from territorial boundaries to technology exchange programs. But the core was simple. Both species would coexist as equals, neither ruling the other. On the final day, the Emperor made an unusual request. He asked for volunteers from Earth to come to the Zethran Military Academy as instructors. Not as prisoners or servants, but as teachers. My empire has fought wars for 5,000 years, the Emperor explained. We have perfected warfare as a science. But watching your species, I realize we have forgotten something important. War is not just science. It is also art, creativity, adaptation. These things cannot be programmed or calculated. They must be taught by those who understand them instinctively. Admiral Lewis approved the request and selected a team. Sergeant Danny Hughes, who had held Montana against impossible odds. Captain Ryan Foster, who had flown jury-rigged ships into battle and survived. Lieutenant Karen Miller, who had fought on ground and in space with equal ferocity. And Nicole Page, the engineer who made the impossible possible. They would go to the Zethran Empire not as conquered people, but as equals sharing knowledge. 1 year later, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Valiant, watching through long-range sensors as the Zethran fleet engaged a new enemy. Machine intelligences from another part of the galaxy had begun consuming civilizations, turning organic life into raw materials. The Zethrans fought with their typical precision and order, but Jake noticed something different in their tactics. Unexpected maneuvers, creative strategies, units operating with independence rather than rigid command structure. They were fighting like humans. The message came through every communication channel simultaneously. The Zethran Emperor himself was coming to the Sol system. He would bring with him the full might of the Empire's core fleet. More than 1,000 warships representing centuries of military power. The war would end in one final, decisive battle. Admiral Patrick Lewis read the message 3 times, each time hoping he had misunderstood. 1,000 ships. The human fleet had been reduced to 97 operational vessels, and many of those were barely holding together with repairs and salvaged parts. He called an emergency session of the United Earth Council. President Laura Mitchell sat at the head of the table, her face showing the exhaustion they all felt. 5 months of war had aged her 10 years. Around the table sat representatives from every major nation, military commanders and civilian leaders. We need to discuss our options, Lewis said quietly. The Emperor is bringing overwhelming force. We can fight, but the outcome is mathematical certainty. We will lose. What are the alternatives? President Mitchell asked. Surrender, Lewis replied. The word felt like poison in his mouth. We negotiate terms. Perhaps we can save some portion of humanity's freedom. Maybe we can spare Earth from total occupation. The room erupted in argument. Some supported the idea, seeing it as the only way to preserve human life. Others refused to even consider surrender, arguing that freedom was worth more than survival under alien rule. Captain Helen Carter stood up, commanding attention through presence alone. With respect, Admiral, I don't think surrender is an option they'll accept. Not anymore. We've killed too many of them. We've humiliated their military. The Zethrans came here expecting an easy conquest. Instead, we've given them the bloodiest war in their empire's history. They won't let us surrender with dignity. They'll crush us completely. Then what do you suggest? Mitchell asked. Helen looked around the room. We fight. We make it cost them so much that even victory tastes like defeat. And maybe, just maybe, we find a way to survive. Commander Jake Morrison had been sitting quietly in the corner, his mind working on a problem that seemed impossible. Now he spoke up. What if we don't meet them head on? What if we change the battlefield completely? Lewis turned to him. Explain. Jake stood and pulled up a tactical display of the solar system. The Emperor is coming here to personally oversee our defeat. He's bringing his flagship, the Imperial Dreadnought. That ship is the pride of the Zethran Empire. It's never been damaged in 5,000 years of warfare. So? Someone asked. So we kill it, Jake said simply. We ignore the rest of the fleet and focus everything on that one ship. If we can destroy or cripple the Emperor's flagship, it will be a psychological blow they can't recover from. That's insane, another officer said. The Dreadnought will be protected by hundreds of ships. We'd never get close. Not if we fight them their way, Jake agreed. But what if we fight them our way? What if we don't meet them in open battle? What if we make them chase us, spread them out, and then hit them when they're not expecting it? Lewis studied the display, his tactical mind running through possibilities. It was a terrible plan, full of risks and unlikely to succeed. It violated every principle of military strategy. The enemy had overwhelming numbers. Meeting them with anything less than full force was suicide. Then again, everything humanity had done in this war was supposed to be impossible. Maybe it was time for one more impossible plan. Let's hear the details, Lewis said. Over the next 3 days, Jake worked with Nicole Page, the engineer who had been retrofitting human ships with alien technology. She had one more trick up her sleeve, something she had been working on in secret. I've been studying Zethran shield technology, Nicole explained, showing Jake her research. Their shields work on a harmonic frequency. They're incredibly strong, but if you hit them with exactly the right frequency, you can create a cascade failure. The problem is you need perfect timing and multiple sources hitting different points simultaneously. How many sources? Jake asked. At least 50 ships, all firing at the exact same moment, all calibrated to slightly different frequencies that combine into the harmonic we need. Nicole pulled up a simulation. If we get it right, their shields collapse completely for about 2 minutes. More than enough time to do serious damage. And if we get it wrong, then we waste our entire attack and accomplish nothing. Nicole met his eyes. This isn't a sure thing, Jake. It's a prayer wrapped in math and held together with hope. Sounds like everything else we've done in this war, Jake replied with a grim smile. The plan was presented to the full command staff. It was approved with only 3 dissenting votes. Over the next week, every operational human ship received the necessary modifications. Nicole's team worked around the clock, calibrating weapon systems and installing the frequency generators needed for the attack. Captain Ryan Foster prepared the Defiant for what he knew might be a one-way mission. His crew worked in silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. Private conversations happened in quiet corners. People wrote letters they hoped someone would deliver if they didn't survive. Lieutenant Karen Miller, the soldier who had fought in the ground war in Montana, volunteered for the fighter squadrons that would escort the capital ships. She had survived 2 weeks of brutal combat against Zethran ground forces. Now she would face their fleet in the cold vacuum of space. Why volunteer? Her commander asked. You've already done more than anyone could ask. Because someone has to, Karen replied. And because I'm not done fighting yet. The Zethran fleet arrived on schedule. 1,000 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. At the center of the formation sat the Imperial Dreadnought, a ship so massive it looked like a small moon. Its hull was covered in weapons, shields, and armor that had never been breached. The human fleet was nowhere to be seen. Admiral Krevthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the empty space where he expected to find human vessels. Scan the system, he ordered. Find them. The scans revealed human ships scattered throughout the solar system. Small groups hiding in asteroid fields behind moons, in the upper atmospheres of gas giants. They weren't prepared for battle. They were running. The Emperor himself sat on his throne in the Dreadnought's command center. He was ancient by human standards, but Zethrans lived for centuries. He had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, the conquest of dozens of worlds. This should have been just another campaign. "They're hiding," the Emperor said with disgust. "Send the fleet to hunt them down. I want this finished today." The Zethran fleet divided into dozens of smaller groups, each pursuing a different cluster of human ships. It was exactly what Jake Morrison had predicted they would do. The aliens couldn't resist the opportunity to crush the scattered human forces. As the Zethran ships spread across the solar system, chasing their prey deeper into the outer reaches, the Imperial Dreadnought found itself with a smaller escort than intended. Still protected by nearly 100 warships, but no longer surrounded by the full might of the Empire's fleet. Jake watched from the bridge of the Valiant as the enemy fleet dispersed. "All ships, this is Morrison. Begin Phase 2. Converge on the primary target." This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. From every hiding spot in the solar system, human ships emerged and accelerated toward one point. They came from the asteroid belt, from behind Jupiter's moons, from the rings of Saturn. 97 vessels, every single ship humanity had left, all moving toward the Imperial Dreadnought. The Zethran escorts moved to intercept, but the human ships didn't slow down. They fired as they came, targeting the escorts with concentrated salvos. Ships exploded on both sides, space filled with debris and fire. Captain Helen Carter piloted the Valiant through the chaos, her hands steady on the controls. Energy beams crossed her path. Missiles flew past her shields. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. The only thing that mattered was reaching the target. Lieutenant Karen Miller's fighter squadron screened the capital ships, engaging Zethran interceptors in close combat. Her squadron had started with 20 fighters. Now there were 11 left, and they were still 5 minutes from the target. Nicole Page sat at a technical station aboard the Valiant, monitoring the frequency generators on every human ship. She had calculated the exact moment when all ships would be in range. All weapons would have line of sight to the Dreadnought. That moment was approaching fast. 30 seconds, she announced over the command channel. "All ships prepare to fire on my mark. Remember, exact timing is everything. Early or late, and this doesn't work." The human fleet pushed forward, taking casualties but never stopping. They lost 12 ships in the final approach. Then 20. The escorts fought desperately to protect their Emperor, but there were too many human vessels coming from too many directions. 10 seconds, Nicole counted down. "Weapons ready. Wait for it. Wait for it." The Imperial Dreadnought filled their view screens, massive and seemingly invincible. Fire! 97 human ships fired at the exact same moment. Every weapon, every missile, every energy beam, all calibrated to slightly different frequencies. The combined fire looked like a star-going supernova, a concentration of destructive force aimed at a single target. The Dreadnought's shields glowed brilliant blue,